So on today's video I wanted to talk to you about the band that more than any other led to Bostunage actually existing in the first place, and that's Vehicle Derek. So, Vehicle Derek, or as they were first known, VDSM, with Vehicle Derek being the VD, and then SM would change gig by gig. So it would sometimes it was Vehicle Derek Schizoid Maniacs, other times it was Vehicle Derek Suede Mountains, and even Vehicle Derek Soul and Motown, I think, on one instance. So anyway, VDSM. So I first saw them, and it's ingrained in my head still now. 26th of November 1988, which was also my sort of first punk gig at Boston's Indian Queen. Now, Del from Vehicle Derek, the singer in Vehicle Derek, and his sister Estelle started bringing out of town bands to Boston to play. And so at that gig, the first band on that night was actually this new band from London, who no one knew who they were, and I think it was perhaps one of their first gigs. I think maybe one of the first times they'd played outside of London. And that band was called Snuff. Whatever happened to them, eh? But of course I remember they started off with a cover version of Tiffany, I Think We're Alone Now, and said this song's by Tiffany, and everyone just stood there and went, because they were just amazing. And it was just all of a sudden it was like, wow, you know, this is next level, this is really exciting. And so I remember that the first time I actually saw Vehicle Derek was when they went on after Snuff, and I think because people were so sort of thrown by Snuff, no one had danced. They were kind of just stood there agawk, like going like that at what they were witnessing. But by the time Vehicle Derek then came on, obviously being the local band, the place went nuts. Yeah, they were just so exciting to watch. You know, me being like 16 years old at the time, really into the music, and like here was the guys who were like a year, 2 years older than me. All from Boston Grammar School. I was from up the road in Spilsby, so yeah, like I say, they were all a year or 2 years older than me, still are in fact. And yeah, it was just like seeing, wow, you know, this is a band local to me, my sort of age group, doing this amazing stuff, playing the bands that I'm really getting into, and just doing it. And it was just really, really exciting. So yeah, so that was the first time I saw them. I mean, basically at the time they were very heavily influenced by bands like Stupids, Minor Threat, Dag Nasty, Descendants and stuff, and obviously after that gig, Snuff. And the headliners were Mega City 4, and Mega City 4 used to love coming to Boston because I think it was the first place they actually had like people dancing at their gigs. So if you're a bit of a collector and you've got the Transophobia album, Mega City 4's first album, you'll actually see on the front cover Danny is wearing a Vehicle Derek t-shirt on that, little known fact. So anyway, so the band themselves, so VDSM as they were called in those days, consisted of Del on vocals, Jace Etherington on guitar and bass, Jim Davis on guitar and bass, and Adam Warren on drums. And basically, depending on who had written the song, as far as I know, that's why Jace and Jim would swap between bass and guitar. Now the funniest thing is that there's like about a foot difference in their size. You know, Jace was nearly a foot taller than Jim, so they had to have two straps and worked it all out, and they used to swap in between songs. So this obviously led to a few gaps between songs, so Del used to have to kind of keep the audience occupied in between while they did it. So he'd come up with classics like Hands Up, Who's a Shithead, and put his hand up. It was also after like a round of applause, What's That, as someone just put the chips in, was another one he did. And to my knowledge, they're the only band that I know that actually did a Dag Nasty inspired joke on stage, because they actually said, we're going to do exercises now, and then went and did some press-ups. Obviously a bit of a niche joke if you're not a Dag Nasty fan. So every time the Vehicle Derek played, they would bring out-of-town bands on the bill as well. So this is where I first not only saw Mega CC4 and Snuff, but I also saw the likes of Census Things, The Sect, Filler, Fudge Tunnel, lots of bands, Venus Beads, and the mainstays who seemed to come back again and again and again was Sync. And so we used to see Sync quite regularly. That's where I obviously first got to know like Paul and Ed from Sync, who'd later be in K-Line. Vehicle Derek got offered to do a Radio Lincolnshire session. This must have been about sort of like February or March of 1989. Recorded 5 songs for that, and that tape got worn out because you could finally hear what you were seeing live. Wasn't the best recording in the world, you know, and this was a thing that I think you could probably say about every Vehicle Derek record and recording that happened, is they never really captured that live energy in the recording studio as much as they tried over the years. So I do remember that it must have been in around April, May time, Sync were due to play the Indian Queen again, and Jace broke his arm, or his wrist I think, and it was in plaster, so they couldn't play. So they actually asked my band that was at the time, Sick Bus, to play, so we supported Default and Sync as our first gig in May 89. Our second gig in July 89 was with Perfect Days, but also with Vehicle Derek. Jace was on the men by then, and they were playing gigs. Now, bearing in mind they were a couple of years older than me, they were getting ready to go to university. So the whole thing, just as we wanted to kind of look at doing a record, the original idea was a Vehicle Derek Sick Bus split 7-inch, and that was sort of like the idea in the summer 89. It was starting to fizzle out. I think Jim was sort of doing Big Chief Fail with his brother, so I think that he was going to go off to uni as well, so the whole thing was kind of starting to implode a little bit at that time. But they were still keen, and we definitely wanted to do the 7-inch as well. But they decided to carry on for a short while as a 3-piece. So Del started playing bass as well, and Jace just permanently on guitar. Also, I think with Jim leaving the band late in 1989 and moving to a 3-piece, the decision was made to actually just shorten the name to Vehicle Derek at that point. And it's actually that lineup went into the studio to attempt to record the split single in January 1990. By that time, Sick Bus was no more, and we'd actually asked a band over in Norwich called Goober Patrol, who I'll speak about on another video, to do the split 7-inch with us. So I think they only played one show as a 3-piece with Del on bass, and that was supporting Goober Patrol in Boston in January 1990, which was the first time I think the Vehicle Derek and Goober Patrol actually met each other, and they got on like a house on fire. So the idea was put forward to do some more gigs together after the 7-inch single had come out, and that, but because of university, that's why it only happened in like the July and August of that year. And by that time, I'd already agreed to do the record by Damage, so they tagged along for a few of those shows too. So both versions of the split 7-inch for Vehicle Derek were recorded at this recording studio called Gems, which was in a little remote village called Frampton that's south of Boston. And it was run by a guy called Graham Royce, who was a farmer. And his son Edward, I think, was like a keen singer-songwriter, and Graham had actually sold some of his farm to build a recording studio, and he also had a vocal PA, which is the one we always used to rent for all the gigs at the Indian Queen that went on. So they went there because obviously it was the local studio, to mixed effect. Probably looking back on it now, it would have been better to try a different, perhaps more punktastic recording studio to record at, but the band went in January 1990 to have a first attempt at recording the single there. I remember we were just about to send it off, and obviously we'd actually done the flyers, so a lot of the flyers for the split 7-inch said it was a 6-track 7-inch, but it's not, because I remember Adam actually drove unannounced to my house and knocked on the front door and said, "We can't release that, we need to re-record it, please don't release it, let us re-record it again." By which time they drafted Andy in to play bass, Andy Sandel, who used to sort of like go around with the band, and he wasn't actually officially a member at that point, but he soon was. And they re-recorded it, and thank goodness they did, because the re-recorded 2 songs they did were way better than the first attempt at recording. But it did hold the process up, so the single only came out in April 1990, and I remember we had a launch gig for the record about 2 or 3 days after it turned up with Sync at Boston Indian Queen, and I think we sold about like 60 copies at this one show on the one night. That was sort of like how much people wanted to buy something by Vehicle Derek at that time. So yeah, so it was great, but obviously the problem was that the band were now moving away, and so any gigs, because of the moving away to university and stuff, were going to have to be done in the summer, July and August of 1990. And we played a heck of a lot of gigs in those 2 months. And I'd been toying around the idea and saying, yeah, we need to do a Vehicle Derek album after this. And I know that Ed from Sync had actually offered to produce and record it at that point, but it all started to just, I think they thought at the time, as far as I can tell, that it kind of ran its course. And with everyone going off, the members who hadn't gone off to university were now going off to university as well. So it just was going to be sort of, it just was going to be too hard to carry on doing it. And I think they wanted to just go out, having done the single, those brilliant gigs. I remember that they did 2 gigs in one day. We played, they played it with Goo Patrol actually. It was at Stamford Skate Park in the afternoon. It was like a benefit for a skate park there. And then we drove up to Lincoln and they played with, I think Jim's band Big Chief Fail that he was doing with his brother played, and also Identity and Drive, who were on tour, and Goo Patrol and Vehicle Derek. And that was just, I just remember that being an immense gig. And I think they came off the stage after that gig saying, that was it, that we're not going to play better than that. And they were absolutely on fire that night, I seem to remember. So the overriding factor with Vehicle Derek was that this was fun. And they never ever took themselves too seriously. I also remember at the London show on that tour, they were probably the only band ever where 4 members and their equipment arrived in 7 different cars over the space of about 3.5 hours. I do remember the drum kit arrived about 2 hours before the drummer did, but it was great fun. And I think the London show was organised by Aidan from Juice, who'd played up in Boston previously and used to put gigs on with Goo Patrol and stuff. And that's where I believe Goo Patrol were interviewed by Metal Hammer, and I think that's where I first met James Sherry, which is at the Lady O in Arms in July 1990. I also remember for a while in the gigs on that summer tour, they came up with this great idea of having their packed lunch halfway through the set because they didn't have enough songs to pad out how much time they had to play for. So and then they started, that's how things like Sandwich Break Intro came about. That's on the album. That was, they used to introduce their packed lunch. So whilst the re-recorded version of the songs that ended up on the split 7-inch were much better than the first version, it still didn't really capture what Vehicle Derek were all about, I thought. And so I was really keen to still do another record by them. Obviously, when the band fizzled out after that summer, all hopes of doing a Vehicle Derek further record were kind of, a distant memory. Until we sort of fast forward till about 1999-2000, when I'd obviously restarted doing the label again at that point. And obviously there was this wonderful thing then called like the internet, where people could actually find people they'd lost touch with. And I think either Andy or Del got in touch with me and just said, oh yeah, we're around, or something like that. And I actually put forward to them and said, you were going to do like that album back in 1990. Do you fancy doing it now? Unbeknownst to me, they did tell me that they'd had like the odd brief reformation of the band, if all of them happened to be back in Boston, or most of the band members happened to be back in Boston at the time. So it doesn't like the one-off gigs and stuff, but nothing much more than that. And they seemed into the idea, and it was great to think that finally 10 years on we'd be doing a Vehicle Derek album. So I know they recorded up in the northeast because Jace had moved to the northeast by this time, and so they did one recording, sort of like a demo, which ended up on the first Boss Samplerage compilation label sampler as like a taster. But then I think that for reasons geographically or whatever, Jace couldn't do it. So the end lineup that then sort of moved forward was that Jim came back in onto guitar, Andy on bass, Adam on drums still, and Del on vocals still. And they started rehearsing, and they did a demo at Rich Bitch Studios in Birmingham, because Del was living in Birmingham I think at the time, and Jim was in Oxford, and I think Adam might have been in Leeds, and Andy was in Yorkshire I think at that point. And so they all sort of congregated, recorded 5 of the old songs, and we ended up putting that on the instant singles collection comp that we put out, comp CD. And then they played a few gigs. So I remember them came down to Croydon and played an all day there with Blocko and Serpico and things like that. So obviously, and I think they played a gig with Milloy somewhere as well. And so we managed to get them onto a few gigs and things like that with the other bands on the label and stuff like that. So then they planned to get sorted with the studio. Now I think Ed was approached to produce it because he was obviously said 10 years earlier, but I don't think he was available from memory. But the band decided to go to Purple Rain Studios in Great Yarmouth, which is obviously where not only Goober Patrol had recorded, but also Sync had recorded there, and Big Ray and some of the other bands after that. So they went in there in this must have been 2001, I think, and recorded like a lot of the old songs, reworked versions of the old songs for that Vehicle Derek album. And again, I think that whilst it was good, it still didn't kind of get what they were all about live on record. It's still a great album, and actually with things that have happened since then, I look at it very fondly. And it was great to finally release something. John Peel played a couple of songs off it, I think, from memory at the time. And I know that the production could have been a touch better. I don't think they were completely happy with how it came out, but it was a much better representation of the band. And it was great to hear some of those songs that I just had on like really bad cassettes from back in the day, properly recorded finally. And I think they're a cracking band, I really do. And I think they're a very, very underrated band. And I think anyone that probably saw them live at that point will remember seeing them play live, and they never really captured it. I think the thing that set them apart for their age and the time, looking back on it now, was just Adam was just a phenomenal drummer, an absolutely phenomenal drummer, one of the best drummers I've seen in UK punk bands, full stop. I remember at the time he actually went to a drumming tutor, I think, so he could improve, and after a sort of 5 minutes with the drumming tutor, the drumming tutor said, "I can't teach you anything." And and it was that kind of linchpin, and that's what actually projected their sound. So just brilliant band. And like I say, it was enough to make me sit them and notice and want to do a record label because they were that good. So after the 14-track CD came out and they played these shows, John Peel had played it, I think everyone kind of thought that was mission accomplished. So there was no real plans to do a follow-up record. I'd have been quite happy to do one, but I think as far as they were all concerned, I think the band was kind of had set out what they wanted to achieve, and that was enough now. What they went on to do, Jace is still in the unit Armour, I believe, with Steve from who was in Crane, and has been for many a year now. Jim, I believe, still lives in Oxford. He does a lot of music and art projects. He did stuff like Spunkle, I believe. And Del and Andy would go on to do a band called Benny with yours truly and Alan Boyce. We'll talk more about Benny on another thing. And that went on until Andy emigrated to America in about 2004, I believe. And finally, Adam sadly is no longer with us. He died in 2017, and way too early. Is a massive loss, but it actually makes me even more happy that we did do that Vehicle Derek album finally in 2001 as a fitting tribute to a great band. And I honestly say that, hand on heart, probably without Vehicle Derek there wouldn't have been a Boss Tunage. That's it for this time. See you on the next video.
One day, pretty soon I've got it all.